On August 28th, the entire east coast of the United States braced for Hurricane Irene. As the hurricane diminished to a tropical storm and the country breathed a huge sigh of relief, Vermont was just beginning to face its greatest natural disaster since 1927. This is just one part of one of the many stories of bravery, generosity, and humor that took place in small towns all over Vermont.
It was raining, but I really didn't think it was raining that hard.
But it just continued to rain and rain and rain.
The water came up a little more, and the water came up a little more.
I saw huge trees that were coming down the river, and I could hear them crashing into the Tweed River Bridge, and you just knew there was something major that was happening.
I have not seen that river that high before.
And they were still predicting another 6 hours of rain. So at that point, we packed a bag and I took the kids and my mom. We got out of the house.
It was a little scary when we left the house.
Good. Okay, this really is a big storm. Yes.
We started seeing propane bottles. We started seeing toys from the neighbors' folks up the road.
At that point, when we were driving away, you know, it was sort of a disbelief. Like, it still didn't register, really, what was happening.
More water started coming. It's like, by then I'm thinking, boy, this could be, you know, serious.
It's hard to leave. Your instinct is to stay until you're forced to go. That's my instinct, anyways, was to stay until I was forced to go. You know, Greg Martin was like, okay, it's time to leave, you gotta go.
And on the way through, I noticed Tracy was trying to get stuff out of her house, so we stopped and helped her get some things out of there, get her evacuated.
And it looked like Tweed River was running right down Route 100.
I just could not believe the water that was in the road.
It was like a different planet down there.
Huge trees, stuff coming downstream that just sounded like Godzilla. You know, it was just these huge pines just shaking, the tops, the ground shaking from boulders.
Somebody said, well, now we're getting a thunderstorm. And so everybody came out and we're looking around, and it wasn't thunder, it was boulders and trees and rocks pounding down the river.
Boom, boom. That's pretty much what it sounded like.
It was just the amount of energy that was just transmitted through the ground. You could feel the ground shaking from the boulders just being tossed downstream.
About that time, the fire pager started going off and couldn't get to town.
So I called our select board chairman, Mark Began, and he said, well, we have big problems down at this end of town too. So I asked if I could put our emergency plan into operation.
There was a tree that came up out of the river, came down, sheared off the pole railing, which I was setting things up there no more than 15 minutes prior to that, thinking maybe it'll save it. Sheared off the whole pole railing and then sucked back downstream. That was my holy cow moment, where I came around the house, I heard my son scream, and I said, Dylan, you all right? He goes, yeah, Dad, did you see that? And I said, yeah, buddy, we gotta go, I'll meet you out front.
And just these beams started, you know, collapsing and falling into the river, and I thought, this is just horrible. If this is happening here, you know, what's happening downstream?
So every creek was like that, so everybody had that devastation. And when the trees come down, they were rushing in the water, just turning like giant weed whackers. The big one that got stuck by our bridge, it's a pine tree, 2.5, 3 feet thick. That thing came down twisting like this. And all we heard, everybody came running out of the houses because we just heard it just knocking down other trees like a weed whacker would take down grass. Debris hit it, smacked it, and and down it went.
Swimming pools, houses, propane tanks, you name it, were floating in front of our house, and it just kept getting worse and worse, and finally we migrated away from the house up the mountain.
Shows I arrived at 1:30, and according to our plan, I needed to check on our high-risk population. Before I could even start that, 1:45, I got a report that the stump barn was in the bridge at Guernsey Hollow, that their LP tank had exploded.
Just got to Guernsey Hollow, a close friend of mine's house his barn had washed away, and the family was sitting on the bank watching their house teeter-totter and start to go downstream. And I felt very helpless there because they were on the other side. I couldn't even go over there and stand by their side, and I just was watching their helpless faces as their house and their dreams and everything just got washed down the river.
I never thought it was going to come that high on the house. Never in my lifetime. At that point, Mom looked at me and goes, "We have to get out. It's coming across the lawn."
You know, it came up quick. Within 3 hours, abandoned ship.
Oh my God. We couldn't believe how much water there was. It was twice as wide as it normally was. It was coming not only down the river, it was coming down the hillside from Upper Michigan Road.
I could hear water running, so I looked from the top of the stairs, and I looked down. It was coming in through the door.
I see this little yellow rain-coated figure on the edge of their property, waving their arms and screaming. She's like, "They're in the house! They're in the house!" And she's screaming and crying.
She says, she's yelling at them, "Get out."
The guys start scrambling and trying to figure out what they're going to do to get them out.
The puppy went underneath the bed, and I couldn't get her out, and Jack said, "What do I do?" And I said, "Well, get Cody out, because we have a 14-year-old dog."
And out of nowhere, 3 people are in the middle of the river, holding hands.
Me, Don Ziegler, James Marcroft that went in.
The guys got together and they did the human chain, and they thought that they were going to be chaining up to people. And they had this old dog.
We knew we probably couldn't get back in because the current was so bad and the water was still rising.
I got Irene, the puppy, out from underneath the bed, and we came downstairs, and by then it was not knee, but shin deep in our living room.
Greg comes flying in with his truck. He backs in.
What did your mother was thinking when she looked out the window and saw you and your dad and the truck in the water?
Well, it's probably, well, I didn't know that she was watching. I guess she was pretty nervous, and I know she probably yelling, I can hear her probably yelling my name.
I did see him start to back his truck across the bridge. And with that, I felt ill.
I went in the water as far as I could, and I started yelling at her. You know, you gotta look at James, you gotta look at James, you gotta grab the rope.
I saw my friend Beth right away, but the water was rushing so quick and it was so strong that I couldn't. At one point I said, I can't do it.
And at this point, the water is rising quick. We have no idea what's gone on upstream. We have no idea that the covered bridge has collapsed at this point.
There was stuff hitting me in the legs.
My dad walked in, he had a rope or a strap, and he went in with us, and we ended up throwing that out to Jack and Heather.
They threw me the rope and I missed. The current was just so strong that I didn't think that I had the strength. And by the third time I got it, I grabbed it. I was scared, I was shaking, it was crazy. I never, I'm lucky. I'm pretty lucky.
That was pretty scary, and then about 20 minutes later you could see the cars raising up and kind of doing a twirl and going downstream a little bit,
And then the house coming off foundation, and at that point we didn't know how far the water was going to come.
When you see your first house moving down the street in a wall of water, yeah, it's pretty devastating.
I realized, boy, the shit has hit the fan now, boy. We're going to see some stuff we have never seen,
It hadn't affected me. It didn't hit me. I saw those pictures online, and I lost it. Because you didn't realize when you were in it, you didn't realize how bad it was.
It almost smelled like septic. It was so organic. It just filled the whole valley. You could almost cut the air. It was so thick with that smell.
I had the car in the driveway and I had my dog with me. And, you know, what I could see was scary. The front of my house looked like a boat because there was so much water going around it. The house was still there and I wanted to see if the house was gone or not. And it was just, I couldn't leave it, that's all.
We'd heard on the weather that we were kind of in the eye of the storm. And we thought if that was just halfway through the storm, we were going to get just as much. That if we could get the logs so they weren't jamming the bridge anymore, so if more stuff came down, more water, hopefully it wasn't going to cause any more destruction.
And we had figured that if anything, if we could get that bridge unclogged, we would still be able to use it.
It was very scary. And then they had the ropes tied around their waist and they were holding them to take the chainsaws and cut the trees so that they would go underneath. And all I'm thinking is, oh my gosh, somebody is gonna go off this bridge.
That was pretty hairy because they were jammed in there pretty good. And we realized that we had to get them out of there. Other ones would jam in, make it even worse.
Oh my God.
That was very exciting too, you know.
At 3 o'clock, the power went out at our command center. And we were trying to set up an emergency shelter down here at that point.
The town hall, they were trying to set up hot coffee and get food provisions going in case, because there was a lot of people that were getting pulled out of houses by that point who didn't have anywhere to go, were soaking wet, or workers who needed a little break. And so we were basically scrounging stuff from the cabinets and making stuff while the oven still worked for them.
And they're getting from the other side of the road where they couldn't get on the bridge, that the bridge collapsed and you can't get across the road, and how people are doing on the other side and how they're getting information, and people coming on four-wheelers that are getting around. And you know, you hear like Steve Martin, has anybody seen him? He went across to move the equipment on the other side, and now the bridge is down and no one's heard from him. And
There was a lot of times where you didn't know where anybody was, and you didn't know if they were okay, they were out.
And by 5:30, I closed the emergency center here because I had no power, and moved back to my house, and that was the emergency center at that point. But things kind of settled down as night fell.
We hear more stories, and then the lights went out. And not only were we in the dark, but we were in the dark for information.
Cell phones died, and you know, just sat in my car for like 2 hours that night just listening to the one Vermont radio station that was still powered up somewhere up in Stowe, getting all the reports about who got cut off, what rivers got overflowed, what towns are completely stranded.
Just decided there was nothing that could be done that night. Darkness was fast approaching, and we would just wait it out until morning.
I couldn't sleep that night because I could hear all the trees that had actually come together and were stuck by the Tweed River Bridge, and it looked like this enormous beaver dam, and you could hear the wood splintering and cracking and moaning, and you could hear these huge rocks still tumbling down the river. It was just so, it was so unnerving. It was so scary, and I thought, what's going to happen?
It's like a dream the first couple hours after the water receded, and nobody was sure how long it was going to last.
It was Armageddon. I mean, you wake up every day, you start your car, you drive down the road, you go over a bridge, you get on a highway. That's what you're used to for decades. And you wake up one morning and everything's changed.
The following day was just the most absolutely beautiful, gorgeous summer-like day. I do remember that sticks out in my mind, and it was the perfect backdrop for everybody to take an assessment of, okay, here's where we're at, this is the damage, where do we go from here?
You know, the following morning is when we kind of ventured in and saw all the devastation and, you know, realized the extent of it, you know, how bad the town had taken a hit, the houses that were lost, the breaching of the road, both north and south of town, gave us the, you know, the real picture of what was going on.
I remember thinking, this is a lot worse than I thought.
What happened to our town? It was mind-blowing.
I started seeing my neighbors come down with backpacks, and they couldn't get from the road to where the road, you know, they couldn't, there was a 50-foot gully just that was, you know, that the water had eroded this whole section of the bridge, and you couldn't even walk across in mud.
It was eerily quiet. We set up some ladders and some things to, and a makeshift bridge to get across and get over to the road, and we made our way to town.
Oh, it just looked like somebody took a bomb to the bridge. It was just, one end was still up, the other end was completely down in the river, so there was just no way you could cross it. Actually went up on the snowmobile trails trying to hopefully get around, and of course we got up around, you know, just a little ways, and of course snowmobile trails were all washed out.
That's kind of when we realized this is a natural disaster. I mean, we can't drive out, there's nowhere to go. Even if we could cross our bridge, which wasn't there any longer, there's still 5 or 6 or 10 other bridges that are out between here and, you know, the interstate.
And in our town alone, 5, 6 bridges get blown out, houses get washed away. Forget about the damage for the town as a whole, but think about that person or people that loses a house and all their possessions. You can't really understand it because it hasn't happened to you, but it's pretty monumental for that person.
Oh my
There's the river.
God, that's where the pool was.
Yep, now there's the river.
Came back here and seen the amount of damage and the water running under the building, all of it front knocked out, ready to fall into the river. That was another one of them holy cow moments where, you know, 2 big trees under the house with the root balls that knocked out most of its structural. I took bricks and blocks and stacked them up and shimmed it, thinking that maybe that'll hold some of it. That was the next morning.
I looked over at my daughter, and she is just in tears, and I'm like, what's wrong? And she goes, it's my town. And I'm like, I know, honey, I know. See, I go, that was hard.
I just felt really sad because this was the town that I knew all my life. And it's changed a lot. And when I saw the damaged homes, I'm like, this is really a big step in life. We really got to help out.
It was really horrible to first go in that house. Like I said, I was in shock the whole first week. One wall had probably, you know, 7 feet of silt.
It was, Monday was a tough day.
We're cut off, but I knew that we weren't going to be in dire straits. We have a functioning town, you know. How functioning, I had no idea.
We weren't looking for outside help yet. We knew we were stranded, and we were quite fine with that, I thought, and we just were going to take care of ourselves.
There's a lot more people in the village than you'd think when you got to check on everybody. And it took a lot of neighbors that have been here for a long time to remember everybody and make sure that, you know, because this person would know this dozen people and likewise. And so it was definitely a whole town effort.
we made our way to the town hall, and all of a sudden things started coming back together.
Word got out and quite a few people showed up, enough that when we decided to continue having these meetings that we switched from the town hall to the church because it was the biggest meeting place.
One of the people that stood on my mind is George, the blonde.
Everybody come on in, please, so we can get started.
Who's a quiet, incredibly unassuming, I'm not trying to put him down, but he's a quiet guy who took control over every meeting and said a joke.
So around 5:30, Peter comes home. The bird says, "Hi, Peter."
And it was a great comforting factor, and it was really soothing for everybody.
Well, George is kind of the road commissioner and the road foreman. We only have one road person, and he's it.
He was also a selectman.
First meeting, well, the first meeting really went into it kind of blind. I had no idea the extent of the storm. I mean, outside of Pittsfield, I had no idea that Stockbridge was hit just as hard, or Killington and other areas of the state. We had no idea. And but the people at the first meeting, everybody offered to do something. Everybody contributed one way or another, and there wasn't anybody saying, "Well, when's this going to get done? What can I do to help?"
And very unassuming people, just with their lists. All right, this is what we need to do.
People were so organized the next day, I couldn't believe it. And it made me feel safe, Made me feel safe to be where I was. And that's so important after you're not feeling safe. To feel safe is just priceless.
It took 2 days to get a response from the outside world. It took 2 days to have supplies brought in from the outside world. Within those 2 days, this town was really, really resourceful.
The town was setting up a meeting. They had a plan. It actually got kind of exciting. I mean, I feel bad saying it, but then it became fun.
We thought it was going to be several weeks before we had power, and we heard that from sources from CVPS, and they were probably figuring, geez, was going to take several weeks for them to get the road fixed. But like I said, we tended right to it and did it. And
Nobody told us to do it. We just started.
They just got on their machinery and just did it from sun up to sundown.
Most of our equipment was in town and accessible. My brother Chuck went up onto the job site and got the excavator and got it down. Fortunately, the road where the equipment wasn't washed at all. So we just drove the equipment right down the road and then right down Route 100.
As soon as they could get some trucks, we got the stuff cleaned out, the debris and stuff, and they got I think our truck and maybe Joe DeSena's and some other, I guess those were the only two that were available at that time right here in town. It was a town truck, of course, and started hauling, but all they had was that sandy, wet stuff, and it just kept pushing it in there, and it just kept sinking in. So finally we got some better gravel, and I had some road fabric here that we laid down.
Mel Colden, for instance, he's 83 years old, and he was right out there that next morning with his bulldozer.
Yeah, my dad's 83 years old and still runs the business, does all the book work, and he was working 12-hour days, and he wouldn't have it any other way, really.
For my age, the days are longer than they used to be. They didn't used to be anywhere near long enough, and now I say if the day started in the morning and ended at noon, it would be plenty long for me. But I still love what we're doing, and did all we could.
He just went and did it. 83 years old, out there every day. So he would be the one that I would say.
There were a lot of people that stepped up. Mark Began, with his dozer, getting out there in Guernsey Brook and pushing it in and working for 3-4 days straight. Greg Martin, who was kind of a quiet guy all around, but then when he sets to task, he's extremely driven. David Colton, same thing. Chuck Colton, the same thing. Always in a good mood. All these people were always in a really, really good mood the whole way.
Watching these guys get up at 5 a.m. and they're in the excavators and the front loaders, and they were working so hard just to make sure that we could have passable roads. There wasn't any waiting, and they went to work, and you were like, oh my God, look at how hard these people are working for our town, and that just made you want to work even harder to help and do what you can, like making sure everybody's fed.
Whether it was 10 o'clock at night or 5 in the morning. The guys from CV Oil were awesome. I mean, they were there with the equipment, fixing our equipment so that we could continue to do work. They were just making sure we had what we needed to keep the job going.
I was getting up in the morning and going with Sean at like 5, and we would make sure all the equipment was fueled up.
Dawn to dusk, and then even into the dark at night. I worked one night until 10, and a crew that night worked till 3 to get Tweed River Drive, just so you could get back and forth with a 4-wheel drive Jeep or something like that.
I remember one day Joe was up until 3:30 in the morning, and he went in and he was back out at 6 o'clock in the morning because he wanted to see the people's faces when they came out and they had a road.
It was just game on. Finally, something good to do. You can spend your whole life building stuff for yourself and worrying about money or whatever it is. This was a chance to have some fun and do some things for people and watch people smile. It was great.
Everybody needs to eat, and workers need to eat, and we got a lot of food that's going to go bad.
I went back up into town and collected a small posse of friends, and we came down and more or less emptied the walk-in of anything perishable, and we took it back up and started setting up a barbecue on the town green.
So everybody pooled their food. Roger from the store, what's his name, Jason from the Clear, us from the general store, people whose freezers were gonna start to go bad, brought their food out. I know I had a bunch of venison in the freezer that was going bad, and just donated it, and we had the greatest barbecue. Over 400 people showed up, and there's only 480 people in Pittsfield.
It was like the whole town was gathered on the green to eat lunch together. And there was Ben & Jerry's from the store, and anything they couldn't keep was just given away.
And that day we all got ice cream while we were waiting online because the ice cream was melting, and boy, they were just handing out pints and quarts of ice cream, and boy, it was a great day.
It was a chance, I think, for everybody to take a deep breath. There were guys that were already working so hard, getting stuff out of houses, helping the stumps down in Guernsey Hollow. There were definitely some people that were working real hard at that time, but I think it was also a good chance for the community to come together and sort of take inventory of each other and go, okay, we're okay.
It was almost like, all the rest of this is on hold, and here's our little bubble of utopia, and
this is a town of very few people who put everybody else before themselves. On day 1, on day 7, on the 8th week, everybody cared what was going to happen to the community more than they happened to care about themselves.
Peter Borden, who is our emergency management guy in town who probably thought he would never, ever be called in to have to do anything.
I had my guidebook right here at the house. The funny thing is about that guidebook, the select board and myself would break it out once a year and would read through and would look at all of our high-risk people, would say, okay, yeah, unfortunately so-and-so passed away. So-and-so gets added. And do we still have the same needs in town? And within about 10 minutes, that emergency plan is put away, it's signed off on, and it goes away until the next year.
But he certainly did a great job at getting what we needed in here. And anytime there was anything that needed diffusing, and there were a few times, he was right there. And he was a real boon to this town.
We've got approximately 7,000 meals in town right now, MREs.
He just was such a calming influence. He did an awesome job. He did a great job, even when he was delivering news that wasn't so great.
This could be our reality for a little bit, okay? Until we get travel and a more fluid situation with places with real food, we're going to have to eat them. I'm bringing more in.
Doug is a local bartender guy down here, and he is always out hunting and running around doing his woodsy thing. Sometimes he looks like the first Vermonter ever, you know, he's all dressed up for hunting. But boy, he stepped up to the plate. He was our first constable. He would get up early in the morning. He had an actual blue shirt on. It was from Civil Response, you know, with a patch on there, and he had his gun and his knife and his badge, and he looked very official, and, you know, he was very official. He really stepped up to the plate.
One of the greatest comforts we had as we were standing on our side of the island looking over at Route 100 was watching all the gators driving by and seeing Doug Manoli and Tim Hunt on a gator. Tim has a cigar in his mouth. He looks like General Patton, and the two of them are riding back and forth, and it was like something, it was like Mad Max. It was just people on four-wheelers, everyone's moving, but I felt so good knowing that these guys were taking care of this town.
24 hours a day. It didn't matter what time I was here, he was around, always driving through the inn in the middle of the night, coming here, keeping an eye on the businesses, making sure, asking hours, keeping people off the roads, putting in a curfew.
We'll have a curfew, sun up to sundown. That should give everybody plenty of time to do what they need. Get sundown to sun up. Sundown to sun up.
You know, he took some razzing in some of those public meetings, but at the end of the day, that guy cared so much for this town and the people working towards it that he made really good decisions. He was a strong presence on the street.
If you got hurt, you weren't going to a hospital, you know. You're going to be mended as best you can and just sit, and I just didn't want people to get hurt. You know, you had to really think about what you were doing, how you were doing it, and make sure people knew where you were at all times, and that's why we had curfews to keep people in at night, because we had unsafe roads and walkways, and keeping people safe was a big thing, and stressing that to them.
There's just a small band of us for the medical. What we're asking is that you check your medications. Do you have enough supply? If you're going to be short, let us know. We also want to know if people have extra medications that they could share, like blood pressure medicine.
You know, the concern initially was that were there going to be people that needed medication and couldn't get to it, or were there people that needed just medical attention?
What kind of bandaging stuff do we have in our own houses? Can we pull those stuff together so we can get a little medical kit together just in case something does happen?
We were really lucky on our island. We had pretty much everything we needed for survival. And because we were trapped here, we had, for example, our medical team.
We just put our time in. We volunteered it.
It just seemed like the need was going to be greater, the length was going to be, longer, and we were just going to have to set up something more permanent.
My average day, when we got the little clinic at the library set up, we had asthmatics that were having issues with the dust, and even people going into their homes after the flood, and just the silt causing flare-ups. So we did some air treatments, and I think I gave out 6 or 7 tetanus shots.
There's a lot of people who need their generators for medical reasons. So we're limiting everybody to a 5-gallon bucket of gas. We'll be open for 2 hours this morning when the meeting is over, and then we'll be open 2 hours again this evening.
1 hour this evening at 5 o'clock. You can come for 1 hour.
How amazing that I was corrected. That was the first time ever.
Roger and Joyce are some of the most unselfish people I've ever met in my life.
We're not going to have power for, I think the first estimate was a month. So we're not going to have enough gas to get through. There are people in this town who survive off oxygen. There are people in this town who need insulin for their diabetes that has to be cold. That was a real priority. If we can't leave this town for a month, then nobody really needs gas in their car.
We couldn't even get the gas pumps working unless the computer was working, and it was a big, long process. My hero, Sean Lee, MacGyver, come over and help me hook up a generator for me to keep my refrigeration going and keep my food and get my computers working, and I couldn't have done anything without him.
I call him the brainiac, I mean, every time I'd see him, I'd yell at him, "You brainiac,"
And it was a little tricky to figure out, and because of how much power the pumps take, and the fact that they were all on computers and all that stuff had to be sort of disconnected and sort of almost directly wired to the power to get everything working. But we got it working.
The pit stop stayed open. That was like a focal point. The general store stayed open.
Nobody had money, and so they just started a index file for people.
I remember getting to the front, to the cash register, and Joyce was there, and then it dawned on me that I didn't have any money, I didn't have anything with me, so she just kind of looked at me and said, "Well, we'll start a tab for you and we'll figure it out later."
You didn't have any money, there was no ATM, you couldn't go to the bank, what are you going to do? I can't take a credit card from you because we have no power, so I just basically set up house accounts. I took your name and telephone number, and I let you charge whatever you bought in the store.
Tracy's house, even all of Monday, was still surrounded by the new rerouted Tweed.
We swam across the river. It was strong. Like, I wasn't expecting, how deep it was.
Everything. Yeah. We were probably the only people that could comfortably fit in that house because I could stand on 5 feet of mud, and I was just, touching the ceiling with my head. We couldn't get the front door open for several days because there was just, everything had been smushed into the front of the house in the direction the river was flowing towards the front door.
This is what our world in Pittsfield looks like today. Our house, cleaning stuff out, but this is just amazing out here.
My daughter Mimi wasn't in town when Irene came to town. So I called Mimi and asked if there was anything that she wanted from her room. And it was just this little silly stuffed monkey. And we were searching for it. I mean, I dug up everywhere searching for it. Tossing beds and moving her, there was probably like 5 feet of silt, to be had in that room.
What did you find? Monkey! Oh.
Just people passing by, wanted to stop in and help, and a lot of times I was just like so overwhelmed. It's like, okay, you can, whatever you need to do, you don't do it, or I don't even know. Like I didn't even really know. I had been thinking, Irene, you bitch, for a while that day, and I just scribbled, wrote, Irene, you bitch. Barb shot the photo, and then Angelique, you know, took that image and made a t-shirt out of it. And she started a fundraising effort for me and Mimi. Overwhelmed that that's what was happening, that someone would care enough about me to take my artwork and make it a t-shirt and then send it out for the world.
We had school on the green because most of the roads were broken, and that's why they made it there. They put it there so kids that couldn't get to their school could still get to a school.
Actually, it was Magnolia's idea to come up with the school program.
It was really fun, School on the Green, because you got to do things outdoors instead of just in a regular classroom. You got to actually have it in this Pittsfield green with everybody that you probably know around you.
There's a lot of parents in town with small children who are capable of doing bigger and better things. Let's keep those kids here so they can accomplish what they need to do.
Fixing a road, or cleaning out someone's house, or moving trees, or some parents were there helping with the school, other parents were documenting things, and every single thing that any parent did was important, but they sacrificed being with their children for that.
One of my biggest concerns was my children. They were at home alone. They're old enough to be at home alone, but young enough where I was still worried about them. No power, no nothing.
Having such a traumatic thing happen, it really mattered to them to be all together. It was kind of grounding, I think, for all of them.
When they did the big thank you signs, it was their way of putting on paper how some of them felt throughout this, because I saw a lot of parents going, no, 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 we have to do this, you need to, you know, kind of get out of the way. And they were being affected.
You know, usually in your life there's points where you know, something big happens and you go through that. And Irene happened and we went through 27 of them. And, you know, as a 5-year-old, that changes your life forever. And I mean, I really can't imagine being any of the elementary kids, just knowing how hard it's been for me.
The best part was having school on the green.
What was the worst part?
All the destruction and kind of being scared and losing our chickens for me.
Every time I come home from the bus, like I'm half asleep, I always know that it's Pittsfield because of like Tracy's house, all those houses all together. But now that they're gone, sometimes I don't even feel like I'm in my own town anymore. I just feel like I'm in someplace else. Like the lost city of Atlantis or something.
We sent our children down with money and clothes and no idea how long they were going to be living with friends.
You know, there was 5 days of time when I lived in normal world, and then on Saturday and Sunday I came back to Irene world.
When we finally got out, I called my dad, I think on day 2, and said, hey, guess what? We're still here. We're still doing okay. You know, we're alive. And he got on the phone with Andrew. He said, holy cow, Andrew sounds like he grew up overnight. I said, yeah, I think he did.
The whole experience is one of those things you just have to be here to see and understand.
Mm-hmm.
and the meetings that we had every few days that kept us informed of what was going on and how the roads were coming along and when the electric would come on. Those meetings, the people, everybody was talking to each other.
People's attitudes were fantastic in the crowd. There were jokes. Maybe Pittsfield wasn't the worst hit in terms of building damage, but we were pretty badly hit in terms of isolation.
They said, okay, we're gonna meet in another week, and kind of everybody in the crowd was like, no, we need to meet before that, you know, and just that sense of, okay, we have this thing, whatever this thing is, let's keep it going.
I think people realize the seriousness of it, but it was also a time for us to rejoice in each other. We all made it. That was the best part.
I still had a half a gallon of milk frozen in our freezer, and I think we poured a nice big glass of milk, and Verna took it down to Keith, and it was to give someone something so simple, and to watch, you know, Keith's eyes welled up, you know, and he almost started to cry.
Susie Martin brought me down 3 or 4 dinners.
Somehow someone must have known that we lost our toy box in the flood, because one day when we got home, there was this brand new toy box with all sorts of cool stuff in it.
There was always people that was ready to feed us for snacks, lunch. There was always people that were ready.
You know, people I didn't even know. A fellow came down, he says, you know, the door to my house is open. Come up there and, you know, do whatever you want. You know, and I didn't even know this guy I didn't even know this guy.
I think at least for that week, everything was the way it should be.
If there was ever a time to help out, that was it right there, you know. People's houses get washed away, cars floating downstream, you know. No loss of life, we were lucky, but yeah, now's the time to pitch in, you know.
Everybody realized right away there's no such thing as a sacrifice within our means to provide, and it became a theme. The thing that impacted me probably the most were the stories that kept rolling in about people who had long-term grudges with each other. And I'll choke up. But they would walk up to somebody and say, you know, I want your forgiveness. And embrace. That wasn't one incident. That was many instances of that.
I hadn't spoken to this guy in 3 years, and I had no interest in ever speaking to him again. And he came over and hugged me with the oxygen tubes in his nose, and that was a pretty powerful moment.
There was a person in town that I hadn't spoken with for a couple of years, and he was one of the first people that I saw. And at that instant, it didn't matter why we weren't speaking, or it just, you know, it was just different. Everything was different.
All the boundaries and between people, they went away. It was really remarkable.
A lady comes up to me, and as she's walking, I don't even know who she is. As she's walking towards me, she's crying like a baby. And she says, Alex, Alex, let me hug you. She says, I know I never said hello to you before.
It didn't matter who you were or what your financial status was or what your political beliefs were. People just came together and just dealt with the important things, and they put the petty issues aside, which was nice to see.
There was just something that really connected everybody to everybody.
You watch what other people did, not for themselves, but for everybody. And I don't know, I feel like that's the good, the power that came out of the mess.
that food that's in there, all that comfort food we're calling, did not come from the government.
No, that came from
That's
Chittenden.
all donations from Chittenden area that are Rutland.
Really?
Within a couple of days, they had this thing planned where they could get in somehow through the construction and got permission, and the support that they got from everywhere was, I've never even imagined that. I mean, I have pictures of this firehouse stacked to the ceiling with food and supplies.
There was just so much. There was too much, but it was great to see, and even just the organization there, the people distributing the food and how they organized it.
It was very much appreciated, and it was put to good use. Every bit of it was put to good use, and we did have some stuff left over after everything was put together, and we made sure that that went to somewhere where it was needed. And
it was a kind of a welcome, warming feeling that there was other people out there bringing stuff to us and helping us out.
People from Pittsfield and local towns actually donated pieces of their homes that had been damaged by the storm, or barns that had been on their property. They had old wooden beams to replace the ones that we had lost.
In our ceiling of our living room and stuff, my grandfather's house, there was these 8x8 hewed beams that we had taken out of the house and we put into the covered bridge. Yeah, I've lost my house, but I want to help someone. For me, that's how I deal.
I get emotional about it, but it meant a lot to the people in Pittsfield, that bridge.
Not only were we stressed out about the flood, we were stressed out about our wedding. We kind of saw the plans of our wedding disappearing.
We have a wedding in here Saturday the 10th.
Seriously?
Without us even knowing it, this magnificent wedding just came out of nowhere. And I still watch the video and am amazed that, you know, everybody stepped up and did some little part to make it spectacular, and there's no way to thank each and every person, because there was people that did stuff that I'm still finding out about, and people that I don't even know.
It worked out. I think it was a little bit of a break for everybody. Everybody didn't work that day. Carry on with what you guys are doing. Appreciate it and love you both.
Being a member of this community is definitely, I don't know, beyond words.
Everybody thinks because the roads were mended or we had more access to the outside world that everything was okay, and things are still far from 100% okay. It's going to take a long time for that to happen.
Even though people will read about it later as, you know, they'll read about the horrible events. I think for a lot of people here, it meant a lot more than that. It meant that our community was together.
There's no individuals any more or any less a hero than anybody else in this town, because everybody did what they could.
If humanity would be like this, there would be nothing wrong with this world. There would be nothing wrong.